Yes, Charles. I can take it from here. Well, as Peter was saying, my name is King Edward III, and I was born in 1312 AD at Windsor Castle to my father, King Edward II, and my French mother, Isabella. I was a mere 14 when I was crowned king, and as I grew, I was left to clean up the mess of my unpopular father, King Edward II, who had, for one, proven unsuccessful in the war against Scotland. In 1330, I began my reign in England, but by 1337 I had begun a war that would far outlive my life. This was a war that changed England and France in significant ways and lasted on and off for 116 years. This war has since been titled the 100 Years' War. During the 100 Years' War, from 1337 to 1453, the vastly outnumbered England fought against France in an attempt to gain control of the French government. In 1328, Charles IV of France died, and I, King Edward III of England, believed that I was rightful heir to the throne of France because of my French mother, Isabella, who was the sister of the now deceased Charles IV. Many Frenchmen were not at all pleased with the idea of me, an English king, ruling over France. This was one of the primary reasons for the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War was not simply a war between England and France, however. Some in France thought that I was what I said I was, the rightful heir to the throne of France. Others argued that women didn't pass on the role of heirs to their sons. Thus, France was a divided country. Part of what made France divided was a province of Aquitaine in southwestern France, which was a province owned by the English. In 1327, King Philip IV of France confiscated my land in Aquitaine because I didn't pay homage to him. This, coupled with the dispute over rights to the throne, was the deciding moment that started the war. The 100 Years' War can roughly be divided into three parts: the Edwardian period, the Caroline period, and the Lancastrian period, with truces established between these periods. I am personally most knowledgeable of the Edwardian period, for indeed the period was named after myself. In the Edwardian period, I, with the help of my son, the Black Prince, led the English through many victories, including the Battle of Aberloch, La Roche-Derrien, and perhaps most notable, the Battle of Crécy. It was at the Battle of Crécy where we, though vastly outnumbered, surprised the French with new combat tactics and the use of new weapons, like the longbow, which could fire about 5 to 6 arrows at the same rate in which the Frenchman's crossbow fired one. I was a remarkable king, by the way. I believe you in the 21st century would ascribe to me adjectives like the bomb, legit, and perhaps even boss. I was popular with my people, even though at times I was temperamental. I was also known for unusual displays of clemency, which is simply judicial forgiveness or pardoning. Certainly, Clarence. Oh, right. Pardon me. So, my accomplishments. Well, as if the battles I've already listed weren't enough, I established helpful legislation like the Statute of Laborers of 1351 and the Treason Act, which also took place in 1351. It was a good year, I suppose. Garter, not garden. Come now. It was the Order of Garter, yes, the prestigious Order of the Garter that I established roughly in 1348. This order is the highest order of chivalry in England, and only those who have done great things for the United Kingdom are given this honorary knighthood. Besides these accomplishments, and remaining a faithful father, husband, and king through the Black Death and many battles until my death in 1377, I am one of only 6 monarchs throughout European history who reigned for over 50 years. I suppose, to be humble, I must admit that my later years between 1360 to my death in 1377 were met with far less political success. The reason for that, however, is not entirely my fault, as I was met with an illness that inhibited my domestic and international affairs. A good question, Bernard. Whatever. Soon after the Edwardian period, starting in 1364, Charles V of France led the French in reclaiming many of the territories that had been England's since the Treaty of Bretigny. It is important to note that the Treaty of Bretigny was a treaty that listed many of the French territories that were now owned by the English. And by the way, I was the English king who signed this treaty. Unfortunately, during the Caroline period, Charles V of France took back these lands that England had conquered. Then in the Lancastrian period from 1415 to 1453, France was victoriously led by the heretic Joan of Arc. She was a woman! Women should lead men! This woman was a peasant woman at that! She was born in eastern France sometime around 1412 and began to lead French armies due to her claim that she had received visions from different Catholic saints. Two of these saints were allegedly Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine. Hogwashed, if you ask me. Divinely inspired? Why on earth would God want us to be conquered? France was ours through the Treaty of Bretigny. Even though I had died at this point, France should have been ours by now, because I was, as I have said, the rightful heir to the throne. Why then would God speak to this woman to defeat us? I didn't ask for questions, Matthew. So anyways, even though Joan of Arc was clearly a heretic, she had an enormous impact. After the brutal defeat at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, French morale was low. The French believed in her fallacious visions, and she began to lead armies. Perhaps France's most important victory was led by Joan at the Siege of Orleans, which lasted between 1428 and 1429. The English had controlled major locations such as northern France, including Paris. England also controlled the southwestern coast of France. And so, for half a year, England seemed to be winning. But a mere 9 days after Joan of Arc appeared in Orleans, the siege of England against the French Orleanians was destroyed. Though this victory, and many others brought by Joan of Arc, were pivotal for France, Joan of Arc herself was soon to meet a very bitter end. At a mere 19 years of age, Joan of Arc had been captured by the English, tried by Bishop Bavupere Cauchon, and burned at the stake under charges of heresy. After her death, even though progress was much slower, I shamefully admit that French victory was around the corner. And in 1435, France won a diplomatic victory with the Treaty of Arras. Finally, in 1453, the 100 Years' War, with casualties estimated to be over 150,000, it was officially over. Of course. One of the effects of the 100 Years' War was that the era of the knights was over, because technological advancements such as the longbow and cannons eliminated much of the power that horse-riding knights and their armor possessed. As a result of this time period, nation-states began to emerge that were self-identifying sovereign states. Up until the end of the 100 Years' War, this idea of nationalism was foreign, as kings like me would claim countries or provinces for themselves. Now, countries like my homeland England would grow a spirit of national pride and identity in one's own home country. Also, during the time span of the 100 Years' War, the bubonic plague and warfare had cut France's population from about 17 million to about 8.5 million, and England's population also was devastated. To summarize, the effects of the 100 Years' War were technological innovations, a nationalistic spirit, and a drastic European population decline. Does this make sense? Farewell, Jordan.
What's that?